Have you ever felt, at some point in your life, as if you were carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders? As if every pain, every fear, every anguish that crossed your path seeped into your skin, your bones, your soul? If this feeling is familiar, you may be dealing with what we call an empath. But not just any empath, but one who carries shadows that aren't their own, who overflows with pain they never chose to feel. We're not here to talk about delicacy or mere emotional sensitivity. This is a false narrative created by popular culture to soften a much deeper and darker reality. The true empath is a psychic channel, a lightning bolt that draws to itself not only superficial feelings, but also the deep currents of the collective unconscious. It's an instrument through which humanity's pain manifests, and this isn't just a gift, it's a burden, a gigantic responsibility, and often, a silent sentence. While the world celebrates empathy as a light and witty quality, few realize that this popularization has drained it of its essential power. A true empath isn't one who simply feels what others feel. They are the bearers of the world's shadows, ancestral, archetypal, historical shadows, that enter them without asking permission. This burden can devour the empath if they don't learn to recognize and delimit what is theirs and what has been entrusted to them. Imagine an ancient healer, kneeling in a field, vomiting blood, not because his flesh is diseased, but because the earth is diseased. He suffers the earth's pain. This is the modern empath. A being who feels pain that is not his own, who bears the weight of others as if it were his own wounds. And this state, without awareness, is a direct path to exhaustion, to the loss of identity, to the disappearance of the self. In a revealing dream, I saw a woman on a bridge over a chasm. She had no eyes, and her hands trembled between seeking help and warding off the dark screams coming from the pit below, voices filled with desperation, longing, and confusion. She couldn't see them, only felt the pain of each one, piercing her body like open wounds. This woman is the empath, blind to the source of her suffering, unable to distinguish where the voices of others end and her own begins. Being an empath is like being a psychic sponge without having been taught how to cleanse oneself. The unconscious has no morality. It is a sacred and chaotic cauldron that can flood the empath with the unresolved shadows of others. These shadows, often charged with anger, sadness, and trauma, seek refuge, and the empath, without protection, becomes that refuge. I tell the story of a young dreamer who heard the laments of the forest spirits, sudden waves of terror, sadness, and nostalgia that made him laugh, cry, and tremble for no apparent reason. Fear of possession led the tribe to summon an elder, who did not expel the spirits but taught the young man to name them, to dialogue with them. This is the lesson of the conscious empath. Not to absorb everything, but to name, delimit, and transform. Unconscious empathy is a possession disguised as compassion. It can manifest as an overwhelming love that drowns, as a compulsion to help that destroys one's own boundaries, or as an attachment to someone whose shadow takes root in empath's soul, mistaking their body for an emotional graveyard. Empaths fall in love with those who destroy them not out of weakness, but because they have been unconsciously seduced by the wounds of others. They become silent caretakers and sponges, a dark marriage called enantiodroia, the inversion where the healer becomes the wounded, the bearer of light becomes the host of another's shadow, and identity is lost. Your gift is not just emotional, it's psychic and archetypal. You tune in not only to feelings, but also to the currents that shape humanity. Without confronting your own unconscious, you will be dominated. Sensitivity is not a badge of honor, it's a portal to deep shadows. Repressed anger doesn't disappear, it finds a home and leaps upon the unconscious empath, igniting their body and mind. I once treated a woman who wept incessantly, carrying the unmourned grief of generations of women forbidden to weep, becoming a vessel for an ancestral shadow. Being an empath without limits is like drowning in ghosts. The gift is sacred, but it requires structure to contain the fire. Otherwise, the fire consumes. Another dream. A man in a cathedral of mirrors reflecting crying children, screaming soldiers, and dying mothers. He cries out, "What am I?" The mirrors reflect only pain, not answers. This is the empath lost in the immensity of others' pain, unable to remember his own face. You must confront your shadow, the parts of you that cling to being needed, that fear abandonment, that confuse intimacy with possessiveness. These are survival strategies, not flaws. Empathy often arises from trauma. A child who learned to read moods to avoid anger, a boy who tuned into his mother's depression to pull her out of the darkness. This gift born of fear needs to be purified. Ask yourself, who was I before the world told me I should feel for others? What part of me believes love has to hurt? Who would I be if I didn't absorb other people's pain? Would I still be loved? To feel and remain whole. To love without bleeding. To accompany without losing yourself. This is mastery. A woman before the fire, holding a jar of her tears as the storm rages. She whispers, "I feel you, but I am not you." And the chaos begins to calm, not by absorbing it, but by respecting its sovereignty. You are neither a sponge nor a martyr. You are a vessel, a mystic, a mirror. This is the call: honor your wounded parts, give thanks, and release them. Sanctify your sensitivity. Walk among ghosts and not be haunted. You will see pain without repentance, you will feel it without falling, and, above all, you will return to yourself as a living soul, not as a savior. Do you want to feel this power within you? Start recognizing your shadow, defining what is yours and what isn't, and honoring your gift wisely. Your journey as a conscious empath begins now. Have you ever felt, in the midst of a crowd, a weight that doesn't seem your own? An alien anguish that clings to your chest, a nameless sadness that silently infiltrates your thoughts? If so, know that this is the empath at its deepest, an invisible labyrinth where the other's emotions mingle with yours, blurring boundaries, diluting identities. Being an empath isn't just about feeling what another person feels. It's often an archetypal, ancestral phenomenon that goes far beyond what popular psychology can explain. Jung teaches us that the collective unconscious acts as an energy field in which the wounds and traumas of entire generations intertwine. And the empath is the vessel, the channel through which these forces manifest. This role of invisible receiver, when not understood and delimited, can transform the empath into a kind of emotional prisoner. They walk through life carrying shadows that never belong to them, wounds not caused by their actions, pain they shouldn't bear. Imagine an ancient healer who, in trying to alleviate the village's pain, ends up absorbing the suffering of the entire land. This is the perfect metaphor for the unconscious empath. He sacrifices himself, not out of weakness, but because he can't separate where the other ends and where he begins. And without this separation, the fire of others' suffering can consume his own essence. This invisible fusion with the world's pain has profound and often silent effects. Unexplained anxiety, chronic fatigue, unrelenting sadness, irritability that seems to arise out of nowhere. These are common symptoms among empaths who haven't yet learned to create psychic shields for their own souls. But first, we must recognize that this vulnerability is not weakness. It is, in fact, a call to consciousness. Jung reminds us that every archetype is a living energy that can manifest itself for our destruction or our healing. The empath who understands their nature begins the path of individuation, the profound process of becoming whole, where the boundaries between self and other are re-established with clarity and respect. And how does this process happen? How do you escape this invisible labyrinth and begin to reclaim your power? The answer begins with recognizing that the empath is also an alchemist of the soul. The alchemist who must learn to transform the absorbed shadow into inner light. To do this, he needs to become a vigilant observer, a guardian of the boundaries between his energy and that of others. Not rigid walls that isolate, but sensitive and permeable membranes that know how to filter what can enter and what must be repelled. A fundamental practice in this process is cultivating body awareness, listening to the signals the body gives when it's being overwhelmed. That tension in the chest, the seemingly inexplicable fatigue, the feeling of being too heavy, are warning signs that the empath must learn to respect. Another powerful resource is the shadow journal, a space for the empath to externalize confusing feelings, the ghosts that appear without warning. Writing is a way of naming the invisible, bringing what was hidden into the light, and thereby weakening its emotional draining power. And, of course, we can't forget the importance of rest and energetic protection. Surrounding yourself with safe spaces, seeking out nature, establishing rituals that renew your energy, and learning to say no without guilt are fundamental steps for empaths to strengthen themselves. If you recognize this internal struggle, this mixture of others' pain and your own, know that you are not alone. There is a path that leads from chaos to order, from confusion to clarity, from fusion to autonomy. And this journey is made up of small, daily, silent steps, a delicate dance between feeling and preserving, loving and protecting, being present and being whole. If these words are awakening something within you, if you want to deepen this journey to understand more about your empathic nature and how to strengthen yourself in the face of this dark weight, I invite you to subscribe to our channel. Here, we will explore together the mysteries of the soul, the invisible forces that shape us, and the keys to living with balance and authenticity. This is a space for those who want to go beyond the surface, for those who seek not only to understand what they feel, but to transform the sensitivity into wisdom and power. Join us and discover how the empath's path can be not a prison, but an open door to your true freedom. After understanding the empath's complex dance with the emotions that reach him like waves, an even greater challenge remains: not getting lost between the light and shadow that lives within him. Deep empathy brings a paradox: the ability to illuminate the dark corners of others, but also the risk of being sucked into their own shadows. Jung teaches us that every light casts a shadow, and in the case of the empath, that shadow is often the heaviest. The shadow, according to Jung, is the hidden part of our being, everything we repress, reject, or ignore. For the empath, this shadow isn't just their own, it's a mass of ancestral pain, trauma, and fear that intertwines with their very essence. It's as if they carry not only their own ghosts, but a legion of them, from past generations and the human collective. And the empath, with their heart open, becomes an easy target for this collective shadow. They feel it as if it were their own, and often don't even realize when they're being consumed by it. This fusion with the shadow is what explains the profound fatigue, anxiety attacks, and feelings of emptiness that many empaths face. It's the invisible weight that drags through the days, slowly eroding vitality. But the shadow isn't the enemy. It's an essential part of the journey toward individuation and self-knowledge. Recognizing the shadow is the first step toward integrating these forgotten parts and ultimately freeing yourself from the cycle of absorption and depletion. The empath who learns to look at their shadow without fear begins to realize that by embracing these parts, they diminish their power over them. This acceptance brings a quiet strength, an inner resilience that is not based on fighting against others, but on reconciliation with themselves. This reconciliation requires courage to face what has often been avoided: anger, deep sadness, fear of rejection, feelings of inadequacy. These are feelings the empath may have tried to bury in an attempt to be only a light for the other person. But light that knows no shadow is fragile. It's a glow that can be extinguished by the slightest storm. The empath's true strength lies in their ability to unite these two poles, light and shadow, within themselves. This union is what Jung called the process of individuation, a path in which the person no longer identifies only with their conscious and pleasant parts, but also embraces their contradictions, their fears, their wounds. For the empath, this means recognizing when you are being sucked into the pain of others and having the power to return to your center, to your own light. This task is not simple. It requires emotional discipline, self-knowledge, and practices that help strengthen one's identity. Empaths need to cultivate the art of disconnecting energies that don't belong to them, cleansing their aura, and renewing their vitality. Ancient techniques, such as visualizing protective light, using crystals, meditation, and purification rituals, are important tools in this silent battle. But more than techniques, the empath needs to develop an internal attitude of loving vigilance, a careful eye that senses when it is entering another's territory and consciously decides whether to remain there or withdraw. This conscious choice is what allows the empath to walk their journey without getting lost, even in the face of the emotional storms they go through. And when the empath achieves this, he not only preserves his sanity, but becomes a true beacon for others. Because he who knows the darkness and the light within himself becomes capable of guiding without imposing, of illuminating without obscuring, of being present without getting lost. This is the delicate and sacred dance that the empath must learn, balancing giving and receiving, feeling and protecting, opening and closing. It's not a linear path, it's a spiral where you move forward and sometimes backward, but which always leads to a deeper place of wisdom and authenticity. And this wisdom is what will allow the empath not to be a victim of the shadows, but an alchemist of his own soul. After learning to dance between light and shadow, the empath faces one of the greatest challenges: creating boundaries. Not rigid walls that keep the world out, but sensitive, firm membranes that delimit what can enter and what must remain outside. This is a rare and complex art. Because, for an empath, setting boundaries is much more than a practical matter, it's an act of profound courage. It's saying yes to yourself, and no to the confusion that wants to swallow your identity. Jung reminds us that individuation is the process of becoming an integrated whole, and this is only possible when we can say, "This is me," and "This is not me." For the empath, who often gets lost in the pain of others, this affirmation is vital. Creating boundaries is a form of self-preservation that does not deny the other, but recognizes that not everything the other brings should be carried by you. Imagine a river. It can receive water from tributaries, but if its banks are not firm, the river overflows and floods everything around it. The empath, without boundaries, is this overflowing river, a vital force that loses its shape and direction. The empath who learns to set boundaries begins to realize that true empathy is not about absorbing everything, but about welcoming the other person without losing oneself. This boundary may be invisible, but its impact is real. It protects energy, prevents burnout, and allows the empath to be a channel of light without fading. But setting boundaries requires something that doesn't always come easily to empaths: self-worth. You need to believe that you deserve to care for yourself as deeply as you care for others. This inner value is the basis for saying no without guilt, for walking away without fear, for prioritizing your own well-being. There are many ways to establish these boundaries. It could be a daily self-care practice, a ritual to clear your energy after intense encounters, or the conscious choice of who you engage with and to what extent. It's also important to learn to communicate these boundaries clearly and lovingly, so that the other person understands without feeling rejected. It is the balance between firmness and kindness, between presence and distance, that transforms the empath from victim to protagonist of their own life. By establishing these boundaries, the empath also begins to recognize that they cannot save the world alone, and that the suffering of others is not their sole responsibility. This realization brings relief and freedom, the freedom to choose what to take in and what to let go, to be supportive without being sucked in, to love without losing yourself. Little by little, the empath builds a delicate armor, made not of stone, but of awareness and self-love, capable of withstanding emotional storms without breaking. This armor doesn't isolate you from the world, but connects you in a healthier, truer way. The true boundary, then, is not a barrier that prevents contact, but a filter that allows for authentic encounter, where presence is offered without the empath losing their essence. When an empath learns to say no without fear and yes with integrity, he begins an internal revolution. Because by saying no to what consumes you without return, you create space to embrace what nourishes your soul. And this space is fertile ground for true connection, one that respects boundaries, honors needs, and values each person's autonomy. This revolution is not an act of selfishness, but of self-love. A love that does not exclude the other, but that begins by recognizing the inalienable value of one's own being. It's a movement that calls for patience and kindness with oneself, because setting boundaries is a continuous learning process. Sometimes it hurts, sometimes it creates guilt, sometimes it leads to conflict. But it is precisely in this process that the empath grows, matures, and strengthens their sense of identity. Remember, those who don't create boundaries end up being sucked into the pain of others, and that doesn't help anyone. It is in the integrity of the empath that the true power of empathy manifests. If you are beginning to realize the importance of this balance between openness and protection, know that this awareness is a light on the path. Cultivating healthy boundaries is a revolutionary act of love, for yourself and for everyone who crosses your path. If this content is illuminating your journey and helping you better understand this delicate balance, please like this video. This way, you reinforce your intention to grow and help other people awaken to this essential wisdom. Conscious empathy is the bridge between feeling deeply and preserving one's soul, a balance everyone who carries the weight of the world needs to find. As the empath begins to understand the importance of establishing boundaries, an even more subtle and burdensome challenge reveals itself before them: the burden of responsibility. It's that insistent inner voice, almost a demand, that tells them the world's suffering rests on their shoulders, that every tear that falls is an urgent call to be the savior, the healer, the safe haven. This sense of duty is a powerful trap. Jung identified in the healer archetype a living energy that can possess the empath's psyche, making them an emotional martyr who associates their own worth with the ability to suffer for the pain of others. This is a trap where empaths risk losing their way, as the line between genuine compassion and overwhelm is tenuous and easily crossed. When empaths fail to recognize the limits of this responsibility, they end up taking on a burden that should be shared, creating an emotional anchor so heavy that it undermines their vitality and sanity. What should be a healthy channel of help and support becomes a cracked vessel trying to contain an uncontrollable torrent. The empath becomes exhausted, feeling empty, disconnected from their own essence, almost invisible to themselves, while carrying a burden not meant for them. This overload manifests itself in multiple dimensions: emotional exhaustion, chronic stress, anxiety that corrodes from within, the persistent feeling of being too much for the world and for oneself. Then there's guilt, that silent shadow that creeps in when the empath realizes they can't carry it all, that they need to say no to protect their own energy. Guilt presents itself as a ruthless judge, telling them they failed, that they didn't do enough, that their love wasn't enough to ease the other person's pain. But Jung offers us a light in this scenario. Individuation, the process of awakening to one's own autonomy, which begins precisely with the recognition of personal limits and the abandonment of the illusion of emotional omnipotence. Recognizing that it is not possible to save everyone, that each person has their own journey and their own pain to go through, is a profound, albeit painful, liberation. This awareness does not diminish empathy, on the contrary, it strengthens it, as it allows the empath to exercise their compassion with wisdom and balance, no longer as a victim of their own gift, but as a master of themselves. The empath's true mastery lies in becoming an available and loving channel without sacrificing themselves, in offering care without depleting their essence, in loving without nullifying themselves. This transformation is built on the foundation of self-care, recognizing that taking care of yourself is not selfish, but a necessary act to maintain integrity and emotional strength. The practice of self-care takes many forms: establishing energy renewal rituals, dedicating time to deep rest, seeking therapeutic support, connecting with nature, practicing meditation and grounding exercises. These practices allow the empath to renew their energy, cleanse absorbed emotional impurities, and rebuild their internal protection. Another crucial step is learning to ask for help, to accept that you don't have to carry everything alone, and to trust the support network that can arise from healthy and respectful relationships. Furthermore, the empath needs to understand that each being has their own path and their own shadow to face, and that interfering excessively in another person's healing process can be, paradoxically, an act of control rather than help. When the empath adopts this balanced stance, he begins to move out of the cycle of emotional overload and martyrdom and into the space of conscious transformation. From a victim of sensitivity, he becomes an alchemist of the soul, capable of transforming pain into wisdom and fragility into strength. This transformation, however, does not occur quickly or linearly. It is an ongoing journey that requires patience, courage, and a gentle discipline with one's own limitations. But the result is a lighter, more authentic life, where the empath can fully exercise their deep nature without being consumed by it. He discovers that true power lies in preserving oneself to be truly available, whole, to the world. And only those who are in their totality can offer a light that warms, an embrace that welcomes, a presence that liberates. This awakening brings a new quality of life, where the empath experiences their sensitivity as a gift, not as a sentence. He walks more aligned with his essence, respecting his limits, honoring his needs, cultivating an empathy that is also an act of self-love. And it is in this place of balance and wisdom that the empath finds his true strength, the one that comes not from imposed suffering, but from the full awareness of who he is. On the empath's path, there is an inevitable and essential moment, the encounter with one's own shadow. The shadow, as Jung taught us, is the hidden part of our being, the one we repress, deny, and hide even from ourselves. For the empath, who is constantly exposed to the shadows of others, this encounter can be especially challenging and, at the same time, profoundly transformative. Because, while absorbing the world's pain, the empath may be running away from his own pain, from the wounds that were never addressed, from the emotions buried under the need to care for others. It's common for empaths, in their efforts to be supportive, to stifle their own anger, sadness, and fears. They learn to hide their vulnerability behind a compassionate smile, a kind word, and a constant presence. But the shadow doesn't disappear by being ignored. On the contrary, it grows in the shadows of consciousness, becoming a powerful force that threatens to emerge destructively if not integrated. This process of integration is the basis of individuation, Jung's call for each person to become who they truly are, embracing not only the light but also the shadows they carry. For the empath, this means looking within with courage and honesty, acknowledging feelings that have been silenced, confronting the limiting beliefs that fuel feelings of inadequacy or only useful when serving others. This encounter can awaken old pains, repressed memories, and uncomfortable sensations. It's a descent into the personal underworld, a dive into the murky waters of the psyche. But it is in that deep place that true healing begins. By embracing their shadow, the empath breaks the cycle of escape and denial, giving voice to the forgotten parts of themselves. They come to understand that they are not merely a recipient of others' shadows, but a being with their own lights and darknesses, worthy of care and respect. This recognition brings a silent strength, a resistance that does not depend on escape or absorption, but on the deep knowledge of one's own being. With the shadow integrated, the empath ceases to be a passive sponge and becomes a conscious vessel, capable of transmuting suffering into wisdom and balanced compassion. This transformation does not mean losing sensitivity, but, on the contrary, strengthening it with a solid foundation of self-knowledge. It is the shadow that teaches where the limits are, that shows what cannot be absorbed without harm, that reveals the wounds that need tending before the empath can effectively help others. By making peace with their shadow, the empath regains their emotional autonomy. He learns to embrace his full humanity, without masks or denials, and this gives him the freedom to be present for others without losing himself. The journey to this integration is long and requires patience, because the shadow does not reveal itself all at once, and it is not always kind. Sometimes it manifests as repressed anger, other times as deep sadness or hidden fear. The empath needs to allow themselves to feel these emotions without judgment, giving them space to exist and be transformed. It is a process that can be facilitated by self-care practices, therapy, meditation, reflective writing, among other forms of self-knowledge. But above all, it requires courage to face what many would rather avoid. Jung reminds us that everything that irritates us in others can lead us to a better understanding of ourselves. In the context of the empath, this means that the conflicts, tensions, and emotional difficulties that arise in relationships with others are reflections of what still needs to be integrated within oneself. Every difficulty is a mirror that points to an unrecognized shadow, a blind spot on the journey of individuation. When the empath accepts this mirror and turns inward, he begins a profound transformation. From a victim of sensitivity, he becomes the master of his soul. And it is in this mastery that the empath's true power resides: to feel deeply, to be present without losing oneself, to love without being annulled. But this mastery is not a destination, it is a daily practice, a constant exercise of awareness and presence. Each day brings new challenges, new shadows to illuminate, new frontiers to strengthen. Sometimes the empath may feel like he is backing down, stumbling, and that the shadow is threatening to overwhelm him. But it is precisely in these moments that the practice of acceptance and patience becomes fundamental. It is important to remember that the path of individuation is not a straight line, but a spiral that takes us deeper and deeper into ourselves, bringing to the surface deep layers of the psyche to be seen, embraced, and transformed. Additionally, empaths need to cultivate a support network, people who respect them, value them, and can offer emotional support during difficult times. Loneliness, when forced, can be fertile ground for shadows to widen. But true connection, based on respect and love, is a powerful antidote to the effects of emotional overload. Ultimately, the empath who walks this process understands that their gift is not a curse, but a life force, a channel through which humanity can be healed and transformed. And this strength becomes genuine when it is born from the full integration of the self, where light and shadow coexist in harmony. After facing their own shadow and beginning to integrate these deep parts of their psyche, the empath discovers that there is a new challenge to be overcome: communicating authentically and truthfully with the world around them. Intensely feeling the pain, joy, and energy of others isn't enough if the empath can't clearly express their own limits, needs, and inner truths. Authentic communication is the tool that allows them to build healthy, respectful, and genuine relationships. Ones that don't drain their energy, but nourish and strengthen them, without requiring them to lose themselves in the process. Jung teaches us that words are a manifestation of consciousness. When we speak, we bring to light what was previously hidden. It is through speech that we create bridges between our inner world and the outer world, between what we feel and what we convey. But for the empath, this speech must be more than a mere expression. It must be a faithful reflection of what pulses in their heart and mind, a clean and sincere channel between their integrated light and shadow. However, for many empaths, expressing themselves authentically is a task fraught with fear. Fear of rejection, of not being understood, of hurting loved ones, or of appearing too vulnerable. This insecurity can cause them to silence true feelings, accept situations that harm them, and compromise their boundaries in the name of apparent peace. But the peace that arises from inner silence is fragile, and sooner or later gives way to deep resentment, emotional exhaustion, and disconnection with oneself and others. Therefore, authentic communication is a vital necessity for the empath. It is the voice of their personal power, the means by which they protect their energy and reaffirm their identity. To speak authentically, empaths must cultivate the courage to show themselves in their entirety, with imperfections, doubts, and vulnerabilities, recognizing that their voice is worthy of being heard and that their needs are legitimate. Learning to use the language of "I feel," "I need," "I want" is essential to taking responsibility for one's own inner world, avoiding accusations or judgments about others. This assertive and loving communication opens space for deep and genuine dialogues, in which both the empath and their interlocutors are invited to get to know and genuinely respect each other. Additionally, the empath needs to develop the skill of active listening, not just hearing the words, but capturing the emotions, intentions, and needs behind them. This sensitive listening allows him to connect with others without losing his own energy, avoiding fusion or consumption by the pain of others. By cultivating this conscious communication, the empath finds that their relationships become less conflictual and more nourishing. He learns to set boundaries clearly and tenderly, not as cold barriers, but as sincere expressions of self-care and mutual respect. This new way of being in the world translates into less emotional exhaustion, more authenticity, and greater true presence in every interaction. Communicating authentically is also a liberating act. When an empath allows their voice to be heard and practices conscious listening, they break old patterns of silencing, merging, and emotional codependency. This rupture is a decisive step in the process of individuation, as it allows the empath to be recognized in their entirety: their light, their shadows, their strength, and their vulnerability. We know this path isn't simple. Empaths often face resistance, both external, when their interlocutors don't understand their truth, and internal, when insecurity tries to silence their voice. However, consistent practice, the support of caring people, and the conviction that your voice matters are powerful sources that sustain the courage needed to move forward. If this content is touching your soul and awakening in you a desire to express yourself more truthfully and take better care of your relationships, consider opening this space for exchange. Share in the comments what is the biggest challenge you face when communicating authentically. Opening this dialogue is an act of courage that strengthens not only your journey, but that of everyone who seeks to live with more presence and integrity. Remember, conscious communication is the bridge that connects what you feel to what the world needs to hear. A bridge that, built with love and courage, has the power to transform lives and relationships. After following the path of authentic communication and establishing clear boundaries, the empath finds himself faced with an even more delicate and essential challenge: the art of detachment. Letting go doesn't, under any circumstances, mean abandoning the love, compassion, or care that are so natural to your essence. On the contrary, it's a profound, almost alchemical process of inner liberation. Freeing yourself from rigid expectations, from the constant need to control another person's suffering, and from the illusion that you alone can carry the weight of the world. Attachment, often disguised as virtue and invisible to the eye, is the root that keeps the empath tied to relationships, behaviors, and situations that slowly drain them. It is this attachment that keeps you trapped in repetitive cycles of suffering, emotional exhaustion, and endless feelings of exhaustion. He feels responsible for healing, for salvation, for solving other people's problems, even when this means sacrificing his own physical, mental, and emotional health. Jung reminds us that the unconscious, although a source of wisdom, can also hide subtle traps where the ego gets lost in power games, even if masked as altruism. In these dynamics, attachment is disguised as compassion, but in reality it is a prison that prevents healthy growth and autonomy, both for the empath and for those for whom they feel responsible. Letting go is, above all, an act of love, a love that respects the rhythm, space, and individual journey of each being. It is recognizing that it is not the empath's responsibility to be the sole guardian of another's healing, that each person carries within themselves the spark necessary to transform and grow. It is an invitation to let go of the reins of control, to accept the imperfection and mystery of life, to trust in the natural process of existence, even if it means witnessing the suffering and failures of others without being able to intervene. This type of acceptance is not passive resignation, but an active and conscious stance, based on profound respect for the autonomy and free will of others. The empath who detaches begins to clearly recognize where their energy ends and the other person's begins, drawing an invisible but vital line for their emotional health. It ceases to be an overflowing and uncontrollable vessel and becomes a sacred container, which consciously contains what it can bear without being exhausted. This transformation also includes letting go of one's own internal expectations, that voice that tells you that you need to always be available, always be strong, always be tireless to deserve love and acceptance. This limiting belief is a prison that hinders the empath, preventing him from fully experiencing his humanity with its weaknesses and legitimate needs. By freeing themselves from this weight, the empath makes room for a lighter, more genuine existence, aligned with their deepest essence. This release brings deep relief, a feeling of harmony with oneself and the world, which is not achieved overnight, but is the result of a gradual and continuous process. Detachment also allows the empath to develop a healthier and more balanced relationship with suffering, both their own and that of others. He understands that his identity does not need to be tied to pain, that suffering is not the only way to connect with the world. Learn to respect the natural boundaries between yourself and others, realizing that excessive interference can be a veiled form of control that hinders the individual healing process. This learning requires daily practice and perseverance, as the empath may feel guilt, fear, anxiety, and loneliness when letting go of the bonds of attachment, especially when it involves loved ones. In these moments, self-love and awareness are the tools that support the choice for emotional freedom. Practices such as meditation, mindfulness, breathing exercises, and protective visualizations strengthen the empath for this delicate process. Cultivating compassion for yourself is also essential, as detachment requires kindness and patience in dealing with your own limitations and pain. True love, which is born from conscious detachment, is free, respectful, and non-possessive. It allows the empath to care and be present without losing their essence, to offer help without being annulled, to love without sacrificing themselves. This transformation brings an entirely new quality of life, where the empath experiences their sensitivity as a gift, not a burden. He moves towards more genuine, sustainable, and respectful relationships, where energy flows in a balanced and nourishing way. It is only by truly letting go of expectations, control, and the need to save others that the empath becomes a pure channel of healing and transformation. Because only those who free themselves from unnecessary weight can shine with their own light and radiate strength to others. After walking the path of detachment, recognizing one's own limits, and building a balanced relationship with suffering, the empath finds a fundamental strength to sustain their journey: gratitude. Gratitude isn't just a fleeting feeling, an automatic response to positive events. It's a profound attitude toward life, a conscious choice to see the light even amidst the shadows. Jung invited us to step into the shadow so that the light can emerge, and gratitude is the fertile soil where that light can flourish. For the empath, who is so often swallowed up by the intensity of their own and others' pain, cultivating gratitude is a revolutionary act. It's a step beyond mere resistance. It's the ability to transform heaviness into lightness, pain into learning, chaos into harmony. By practicing gratitude, the empath does not deny difficulties, but recognizes them as part of the fabric of existence, as teachers that bring valuable lessons for their inner growth. This practice changes the lens through which he sees the world. Instead of focusing only on what drains you, you begin to notice the small gifts too: a loving gesture, the warmth of the sun on your face, the resilience that pulses within you. Gratitude is an act of courage, because it requires looking beyond appearances and recognizing that even difficult experiences have something to offer. This awareness helps the empath break out of the victim cycle, where suffering dominates the narrative, and take an active role in their own transformation. Modern science confirms the power of gratitude for mental and physical health. It reduces stress, improves sleep, strengthens the immune system, and increases emotional resilience. But for the empath, gratitude is even more than that. It is an anchor, a beacon that lights the way in moments of darkness. Cultivating gratitude doesn't mean ignoring pain or pretending everything is okay. On the contrary, it is a gesture of full presence, where the empath acknowledges their suffering and, at the same time, chooses to honor what still shines within them. This practice can begin in simple ways: a gratitude journal where you record small things you're grateful for, a daily moment of silence to acknowledge life's blessings, a sincere thank you to someone or yourself. Over time, this attitude becomes a habit, a natural way of being in the world that balances intense sensitivity with profound serenity. By cultivating gratitude, empaths also strengthen their capacity for presence and authentic connection. He becomes less susceptible to being swallowed up by the emotions of others, as he is anchored in a solid foundation of recognition and appreciation for life. Gratitude broadens the empath's perspective, showing them that they are not alone, that there is beauty and kindness even in adversity. This perception brings a feeling of belonging and peace that nourishes the soul. The transformative power of gratitude also manifests itself in relationships. When an empath expresses gratitude, they create a positive energy field that strengthens bonds, reduces conflict, and promotes greater understanding. This attitude creates a virtuous circle where both he and the people around him feel valued and recognized. And this is one of the greatest gifts an empath can offer: not only to feel deeply, but to radiate an energy that welcomes, nourishes, and uplifts. Thus, gratitude becomes a powerful tool in the alchemy of conscious empathy, a means of transmuting suffering into wisdom, fragility into strength, fear into trust. Furthermore, cultivating gratitude builds emotional resilience that protects the empath from internal and external storms. It is like an invisible armor, made of recognition and appreciation, which reduces the impact of difficulties and increases the ability to recover from challenges. When an empath approaches life with gratitude, even small victories, simple moments of beauty and peace, become sources of energy that renew their soul. This posture helps avoid the cycle of exhaustion and overwhelm, common for those who carry so much sensitivity. It is a constant reminder that, despite the shadows, there is always a light to be found, a light that arises from one's own essence and from a deep connection with the mystery of life. Therefore, gratitude is not a passive state, but an active choice, a daily commitment to look at life with eyes of admiration and respect, even when everything seems challenging. This choice is a revolutionary act for the empath, as it redefines the way they relate to themselves, others, and the world. At this point in the journey, the empath is no longer that vulnerable and lost being, drowning in the pain of others, who sought salvation in the shadows of others. They have become a whole being, a conscious guardian of their own essence, someone who has learned to feel deeply without losing themselves, to love without nullifying themselves, to exist with light and shadow in harmony. This rebirth is the culmination of a process that required courage, patience, and, above all, self-love. The conscious empath now walks with clarity of identity and the firm purpose of living in balance. The awareness that was once clouded by overwhelming emotions is now a flame that illuminates his path. He knows he cannot control the world, nor bear the suffering of others alone, but he can choose how to relate to it all, with presence, wisdom, and true compassion. This transformed empath recognizes that their gift is a bridge between the invisible and the visible, a sacred channel for healing and deep connection. He no longer allows himself to be consumed by the shadows of others, as he has learned to establish boundaries that protect his energy and to respect the autonomy of others, without losing himself in their pain. This presence is a powerful force, bringing balance not only to yourself, but to everyone you meet. It's as if your soul has become a beacon, a point of light that guides and welcomes, without demanding or suffocating. Along this journey, the empath also developed the ability to communicate with authenticity and clarity, giving voice to their needs and truths without fear or guilt. He learned that conscious communication is an act of love, which strengthens bonds and creates safe spaces for mutual growth. This empath knows that true power lies not in dominating others, but in dominating oneself, in choosing one's responses and not being held hostage by external stimuli. And it is precisely this inner freedom that allows him to exercise empathy in a healthy way, like a renewable source, not like a well that runs dry. Gratitude, cultivated day after day, is the soil where this new life flourishes. It supports the empath in facing existence with lightness, recognizing beauty even in difficult moments, and finding reasons in everyday life to renew and strengthen themselves. Now, looking back on the path they have traveled, the empath feels a deep reverence for themselves, for having faced their shadows, embraced their pain, and chosen the path of individuation. And it is with this reverence that he walks forward, knowing that his journey is continuous, that self-knowledge is an infinite process, and that transformation is the only true constant. This moment you are in now, watching this reflection, is an invitation to join this journey of self-discovery and emotional empowerment. You are facing a portal that can open new possibilities in life, where the weight of sensitivity transforms into a source of strength and wisdom. If what you heard resonated with you, if you felt that these words touched your soul and lit an inner flame, I invite you to sign up for this space of reflection and growth. By signing up, you're joining a community that values the conscious empath's journey and seeks to support and inspire each other in their quest for balance and authenticity. Furthermore, by liking this video, you reinforce your intention to take care of yourself and help spread this message so that more people can awaken to this profound wisdom. And don't forget to comment below. Share your experience, your challenges, your victories. Your voice is valuable and can be the light someone needs to begin their own transformation. Remember, you are privileged to be here, to allow this message to reach you, and to have the courage to look within and seek healing. This is just the beginning of a journey that can change your life forever. May you walk with serenity, authenticity, and strength, knowing that true freedom comes from a deep connection with yourself. Until the next meeting, stand firm in the light of your truth, and always remember, the power to transform is within you.